We are here to discuss in detail Marx's law of motion of capitalism and briefly compare that theory with theory of economic development by Adam Smith. Now let's talk about one of Karl Marx's most important idea, his theory of history. It also called historical materialism. Marx believed that history doesn't move because of either great leaders or religion, but by material conditions, especially how people produce, work, and survive. In his view, every society is built on an economic base, which include the forces of production like labor and technology, and the relations of production like who own what and how people are organized around the world. This base influences the superstructure, which include things like laws, politics, religion, and culture. When the forces of production outgrow the existing relations of production, conflict will arise and push social transformation. This conflict is known as class struggle, which is the key force that pushes history forward. Marx's historical theory is based on three key ideas. First, production shapes society. Change in labor, tools, and technology reshape how society works. For example, industrial production helped bring about the shift from feudalism to capitalism. Next, history moves through stages. Each system eventually develops contradictions that lead to crisis and change, like feudalism giving birth to capitalism and capitalism moving toward socialism. Third, history is made by the people. Social change doesn't just come from the leader, but from the action of oppressed classes, especially the working class, as they resist the exploitation. According to Marx, human society progresses through 6 historical stages, which are primitive communism, slavery, feudalism, capitalism, socialism, and communism. The earliest stage from society was primitive communism. In this stage, people lived in small cooperative communities. There was no private property and resources were shared equally, and also there were no social classes or exploitation. The second stage was slavery, where some elite owned both land and people. The slave was forced to produce wealth for the masters. It created a society based on extreme inequality. The next stage was feudalism, a system dominated by landowner, which is lord, and peasant, which is serf. The economy based on agriculture, and although serfs were not unlike slaves, they were born to the land and controlled by the ruling class. Capitalism emerged as industrialization advanced. Under this stage, private individuals own the means of production, and workers must sell their labor for wages. And capitalism brought the economic growth, but also intensified class division and inequality. In the fifth stage, which is socialism, the working class seized the political and economic control. The means of production become publicly owned, and the goal is to eliminate the exploitation and redistribute the resources more fairly. Finally, communism represents the ultimate goal, which is a classless, stateless society where the resources are distributed based on need, not profit. And in this stage, people are equal. Next, we look at the concept in Marx's law of motion of capitalism. There are 6 concepts, which are labor theory of value, the theory of exploitation, capital accumulation, including falling rate of profit, business crisis, and technological unemployment, centralization of capital, and concentration of wealth, reserve army of the employed, and immiserization of proletariat. And the last one is class conflict. This diagram illustrates the structure of Marx's law of motion. On the next slide, we will explain the first concept, which is labor theory of value.
Hi everyone, my name is Dharshanaan Jeeva. My matrix number is 299166, and I today will be presenting two central ideas from Karl Marx's contribution to economic thoughts: the labor theory of value and the theory of exploitation. Let's start with the labor theory of value. In a capitalist society, most goods are commodities. A commodity is something that is produced for profit and capable of satisfying human wants. Now, commodities don't just have use value, they also have exchange value that leads us to ask what gives a commodity its value in the market. According to Marx, it's not just about the supply and demand. Instead, the value of commodity is determined by the socially necessary labor time, or SNLT. This means the average time it takes to a worker to under a normal condition and the average skill to produce the good. But value doesn't just include the direct labor. It is also includes the labor embodied in the machinery and the raw materials used up to during the production process. All this combined labor is transferable to the community value during the production. Let me give you an example to make this clearer. Let's say it takes 10 hours on average to produce a pair of shoes. That's the SNLT. Now imagine in case 1, an incompetent worker takes 20 hours to make a pair of shoes. In case 2, a skilled worker only takes 5 hours. In both cases, the value of the shoes remains 10 hours, but that's what a society deems socially necessary to produce the item. So individual differences don't change the commodity value. That's why Marx argued that the value in a social construct, not a personal one. These examples illustrate one of the most revolutionary aspects of Marx theory, and it treats the labor as the universal substances that creates a value, but only within a social averages, not individual performance. Let's move to Marx's theory of exploitation. Exploitation in simple terms means using someone unfairly for your own advantage. Marx argued that the profit in capitalism does not come from fair exchange, but from the exploitation of labor. In other words, the wage earners produce more value than they are paid, and the surplus is kept by the capitalists. Here's how he saw it. The intrinsic value of a product is determined by the labor time spent during producing it, but the cost of labor, the wage, is always less than this value. The difference is what Marx called is a surplus value. So capitalism rests on this unequal exchange. Workers sell their labor power, but capitalists extract more value than they pay for it. Let's explore this deeper using the four key concepts from the slide. First, labor power. This is a person's ability to work and produce commodities. It's a commodity itself, bought and sold in the market. Second, labor time. This is the actual process and duration of working. For example, if a worker works 8 hours, this is their labor time. Third, surplus value. This is the extra value for a worker produces after covering the value of their wage. For instance, if a worker is paid for 4 hours but works 8 hours, then the other 4 hours creates a surplus value for the capitalist. Number 4, the rate of surplus value. This is the measure of exploitation. It's the ratio between unpaid labor, that is called as a surplus, and a paid labor, that is called as a wage. The higher this rate, the more exploitative the system is. According to the evolution of economic thought, Marx called this is the law of motion of capitalist society. It's the structural engine of profit accumulation and inequality. According to Marx, labor power is a worker's capacity or ability to work and produce commodities. It is not the actual work done, but rather than the potential to perform the labor. Labor power is treated as a commodity under capitalism. Just like any other goods, it is bought and sold in the labor market. The capitalist purchases this power by paying the workers a wage. Why does the capitalist actually want from the labor power? Profit. Labor power is the only commodity that creates a more value than it costs, and that's what makes the essential to the capitalist system. Next, what is labor time? Labor time, on the other hand, refers to the actually duration of the process of work done by the laborer. This is the real measurable numbers of hours the workers spend producing the goods. It includes the direct labor time used to make the commodity. It also assumes normal conditions such as average skills and productivity at the time. So, while the capitalist pays the workers for the labor power, usually based on the SNLT needed to maintain the workers' subsistence, they extract the actual labor time, which is usually longer. Now, how is labor power itself valued? Just like any commodity, labor power has a value, and its value is determined by the SNLT required to produce the cultural necessities of life needed by the worker. So if it is take 4 hours of labor to produce these necessities each day, then the value of labor power is equals to 4 hours. Here's the twist. If the productivity increases and those same necessities can be produced in just 2 hours, then the value of labor power falls by the 50%. This means workers may be productive, but their wages go down in value terms because the value of the labor power is tied to the cost of subsistence, not their output. This links indirectly to the Marxian idea that capitalists benefits from the productivity growth, but workers do not necessarily share in that benefit.
My name is Khew and my metric number is 298073. Today I'm going to present about surplus value, where surplus value is also equivalent to the exploitation of labor, where it only arises when workers produce more in a day than they must consume, where labor time is more than labor power. Meanwhile, the exploitation of workers, which is the extraction of surplus value by capitalists, cannot occur when labor time is equivalent to labor power. Employers pay the workers full market value of their labor power, but the daily pay only equals only part of the value of the labor created. Some necessity also forces the workers to opt to work, but the labor time they spend during the workday creates a larger sum of value than the value of their own labor power. Capitalists also often set the length of the workday of the worker. Example, workers will choose whether to work the number of hours that they set by the company, by the capitalists, or choose to not work at all. The owner of the means of production gain a surplus value. And how do we get the surplus value? We will take the value produced by living labor minus exchange value of labor power, which is equivalent to wage. And after minusing these two, we will get the profit, which is the surplus value. Meanwhile, the rate of surplus value or the rate of exploitation, we will use two kinds of formula to calculate, which is the rate of surplus is equivalent to unpaid labor time divided by paid labor time, or we use the second formula is we use the surplus value divided by the variable capital times 100 to get the rate of exploitation. In this theory, Marx designed the part of capital invested in machinery and raw materials as constant capital. For the extra value that the capitalist takes without compensating the workers is called the surplus value, which is equivalent to S. And capital that grow as wages for purchases of labor power is V. This table shows an example of how we calculate the rate of surplus value. First, suppose that 6 hours of socially necessary labor time are required. Then the capitalists employ the labor whom supply with the required machinery to convert raw cotton into yarn. And suppose that in 6 hours time, the total money of cost of production is 15, which is equivalent to 3 labor power, 10 cotton, 2 used up for spindles. And according to Marx, 6 hours of labor time is sufficient to produce output that pay for labor power and there is no exploitation. Hence, capitalists gain profit by lengthening the working day without paying the labor. For example, the labor time is more than the labor power itself. For example, forcing workers to work extra 6 hours, the capitalist will secure a surplus of 3 with the rate of exploitation of 100%, which we can use 3 divided by 3 and times 100. So as conclusion, by asking workers to work extra hours, labor can be exploited by their employer to gain profit. An example of calculating rate of surplus or exploitation, we can use the formula which is the surplus value divided by variable capital times 100. So for example, when labor time is equal to labor power, cost of production is 15 and there is no exploitation. When the workers work extra for 6 hours, their labor time will exceed labor power, which surplus of 3, and the cost of production will be 27, which there is a rate of surplus of 100%, where we can get it from 3 divided by 3 times 100. Next, if the worker work extra for 12 hours, their labor time will also exceed labor power, and there is a surplus of 6, where the cost of production is 39, and the rate of surplus we can calculate through 3 plus 3 divided by 3, which is 6 divided by 3, and times 100 equals to 200%. For the alternative calculation for rate of surplus, first we need to understand that normal paid working hour is 6 hours, and the formula we are going to use is unpaid labor time divided by paid labor time. Let's say if the working hour is extended to 9 hours, there will be 3 extra hours. So we can use the formula by calculating 3 divided by 6 times 100, and we will get a 50%. And 50% is the rate of exploitation. Followed by if we extend to 12 hours, which is another 6 hours extra, we will take 6 divided by 6 times 100, and we will get 100%. And if continue, we extend to 15 hours, which is equivalent to extra of 9 hours, we can use the formula, which is 9 divided by 6 times 100 equals to 150%. And lastly, if we extend to 18 hours, for example, there is an extra of 12 hours, we will use the formula 12 divided by 6 times 100, and we will get 200%. Other than that, there are alternative ways to increase the surplus value, whereby increasing the efficiency of production and decreasing the value of workers' labor power, we will be able to get a surplus value. If the workers' necessity could be produced in a shorter time, a larger share of the new value would go to the capitalist. And for example, suppose the working day were shortened from 12 hours to 10, and there will be 6 hours of paid labor for the worker and plus 6 for the capitalist. But instead of that, 4 hours will be for the worker and 6 hours will be paid to the capitalist. So the rate of exploitation would rise from 100, which is equivalent to 6 divided by 6 times 100 to 150%, which is 6 divided by 4 times 100%. And we can use the formula of unpaid labor time divided by paid labor time. Lastly, how are the formula used linked to the theory of exploitation? First, exploitation is defined. Marx argued that labor is the source of value, and capitalists pays the worker only for part of their labor time, and the surplus is equivalent to unpaid labor, whereas also equivalent to the profit of capitalists. And next, capitalists maximize surplus by extracting more labor without increasing the wage of the workers, or by increasing the productivity. Marx also equated the rate of surplus with the rate of exploitation, with the higher rate of exploitation equivalent to more unpaid labor relatively to paid labor. So in conclusion, the rate of surplus value is a mathematical expression of exploitation in Marx theory. It measures how much value capitalists extract from a worker beyond what is necessary to sustain. That's all from me, thank you.
My name is Lim Enxi and my metric number is 300404. The rate of profit is defined as the ratio of surplus value to the total capital invested. Mathematically, it is expressed as P prime equal to S over C plus V, where S stands for surplus value, C is constant capital, and V is variable capital. This formula helps evaluate the profitability of capital investment within a production process. Here is a simple calculation based on figure 10.1. So step 1, we determine the total cost of production for a 12-hour working period, which is amount to Rm37. Step 2, we are given a surplus value of Rm3 for the same period. By applying the profit rate formula, we calculate the rate of profit as 3 divided by 27 multiplied by 100. This results in a profit rate of 11.1%. Next, capital accumulation refers to the process of generating wealth through reinvestment. Profit earned are reinvested into capital goods such as machinery or infrastructure. This reinvestment increases the firm production capability over time, enabling it to grow and generate further profit, thus continuing the cycle of accumulation. According to Karl Marx, the rate of profit or P prime tends to fall over the long term. This phenomenon is attributed to increased mechanization and labor-saving technology. As constant capital, such as machine, rise relative to variable capital like labor, the organic composition of capital denoted as Q increase. This is represented by the formula Q equal to C over C plus V. As Q increase, the rate of profit is likely to decline.
Assalamualaikum Doctor. My name is Izatul Akmal Maisarah Binti Hisham and my matrix number is 297 and 649. Today I will explain some important ideas from Karl Marx's law of motion of capitalism. First, let's look at the alternative of profit rate equation. Marx stated that the rate of profit P is calculated as P equal S and 1Q, where S is the rate of surplus value, how much profit is made from the labor. Q is the organic composition of the capital, or the amount of money invested in machinery compared to labor. From this formula, we can see profit rate increase when surplus value increase, and profit rate decrease when capital investment Q increase, especially in machines. When capitalists invest more in machinery, they reduce labor power, which lead to the fall in profit rate. Second, why do capitalists still use a machinery? There is two main reasons. One, to promote efficiency. Machines make production faster and cheaper. This gives temporary extra profit. But in the long run, price drop and companies without machine can survive. And two, to reduce labor costs. When machines increase, labor become less valuable. Worker needs fewer hours to produce goods. Employees earn more profit per working day. But overall, this leads to higher Q, which cause the profit rate to fall over time. Lastly, Marx explains some offsetting forces that slow down the falling profit rate. One, increased exploitation, for example, making workers work more for less. And two, foreign trade, buying cheaper resources or goods from other countries. And three, technological unemployment, replacing workers with a machine to cut costs. And four, cheapening constant capital, like reducing machinery or raw material costs. And five, temporary wage cuts, paying workers below the actual value. These methods help increase profit in short term, but they also exploit workers and worsen inequality. So Marx believes that capitalism will always try to maximize profit, but this will lead to overuse of machine, jobless, and eventually cause a crisis in the system itself. That's all from me, and thank you.
Hi, my name is Fatin Nadhirah, matric number 297403. Now I will be talking about the capital accumulation and business crisis. So in this slide, it shows how the economy works according to Marx. Marx attacked Say's law, stating that at best it applied only to simple commodity production. So in this first box, we see what Marx called simple commodity production. The process is from commodity to money to commodity. Here, people produce goods or service, sell them to get money, and then use that money to buy other goods they need. For example, a weaver sells a shirt, earns money, and then buys food with it. The goal here is not to make a profit, but to satisfy personal needs. So the second box shows how things change under capitalism. The process of exchange becomes money to commodity to money, where people buy in order to sell, instead of selling in order to buy. A business owner starts with money, use it to buy things like machines and workers, and then the products are sold for money. This means money equal to money, but this process does not make sense. The main goal is to make more money. Therefore, the correct representation of the capitalist process is from money to commodity to money prime, where money prime is larger than money by the amount of surplus value squeezed out of the productive workers. The third box shows how capitalists try to grow their money. They invest money into production, and when they sell the products, they want more money back than what they started with. That extra money is called surplus value, and it mostly comes from workers. Machines and materials can add value on their own. It's the workers who create the profit. So we can see that from this transition, from selling to meet needs to producing for profit, drives capital accumulation. But as Marx warned, this also creates inequality, unemployment, and eventually economic crisis. So, what happens when everyone is trying to make more and more profit? At first, everything looks good. More money is invested, production increase, and more workers get hired. That means wages go up. But then comes the problem. As Wages rise, profits falls. Capitalists want to pay less, not more. Eventually, there is too much production, which is more goods than people can afford to buy. This can lead to overproduction because factories can sell their products, so they will shut down. Wages fall, jobs lost, and the economy crash. So according to Marx, crisis isn't caused by a mistake, it's put into the capitalist system itself. So in this slide, it shows how the economy works according to Marx. Marx attacked Say's law, stating that at best it applied only to simple commodity production. So in this first box, we see what Marx called simple commodity production. The process is from commodity to money to commodity. Here, people produce good or service, sell them to get money, and then use that money to buy other goods they need. For example, a weaver sells a shirt, earns money, and then buys food with it. The goal here is not to make a profit, but to satisfy personal needs. So the second box shows how things change under capitalism. The process of exchange become money to commodity to money, where people buy in order to sell instead of selling in order to buy. A business owner starts with money, use it to buy things like machines and workers, and then the products are sold for money. This means money equal to money, but this process does not make sense. The main goal is to make more money. Therefore, the correct representation of the capitalist process is from money to commodity to money prime, where money prime is larger than money by the amount of surplus value squeezed out of the productive workers. The third box shows how capitalists try to grow their money. They invest money into production, and when they sell the products, they want more money back than what they started with. That extra money is called surplus value, and it mostly comes from workers. Machines and materials can add value on their own. It's the workers who create the profit. So we can see that from this transition, from selling to meet needs to producing for profit, drives capital accumulation. But as Marx warned, this also creates inequality, unemployment, and eventually economic crisis.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Fazreen Athirah Binti Mohamad Zamri. My number metric is 298137. I will be presenting the centralization of capital and concentration of wealth, rise of army of the unemployed, and immiseration of the proletariat and class conflict. The primary roots of centralization of capital ownership and concentration of wealth into fewer hands are capitalism and cyclical occurrence of business crisis. This is because as businesses compete, the winners grow stronger and accumulate more capital, while the losers are driven out or absorbed. This dynamic means that over time, ownership of capital becomes increasingly concentrated. The next point is large firms outcompete smaller ones through scale. In capitalism, the battle for survival is based on lowering production costs. To produce cheaper goods, firms need to increase the productivity of labor, which requires larger scale operations. As a result, bigger firms with more capital can produce more efficiently and undercut smaller competitors. Next is increasing capital requirements and the ruin of small businesses. As capitalism advances, the amount of capital required just to stay in business rises. Smaller capitalists, unable to compete with the scale and efficiency of larger firms, and are squeezed into overcrowded sectors. These sectors experience intense competition, especially because so many small players are fighting for survival with limited resources. This often ends in the ruin of small businesses, whose assets either disappear or are taken over by larger, more successful capitalists. Lastly, the credit system accelerates capital centralization. The rise of the credit system plays a critical role in speeding up the concentration of capital. Initially, credit helps capitalists by pooling money from across society, but over time, it becomes a powerful tool for big businesses to access and control vast resources. Credit no longer just supports growth, it becomes an institutional force that helps large capitalists dominate markets and absorb the capital of others, thereby further centralizing wealth and power. Moving on to the next part, reserve army of the unemployed is also referred to as the relative surplus population, is a concept developed by Karl Marx to describe a constantly existing pool of unemployed or underemployed workers in a capitalist society. Substituting capital labor existed the second effect, which is rising the size of industrial reserve army unemployed. The reserve army enables employers to suppress wages, knowing unemployed workers can replace those who resist. Technological unemployed enlarges the reserve army and the labor surplus becomes available for these emerging industries, temporarily boosting profit. Discipline and control over the unemployed this happen because capitalists are easier to discipline and exploit employed workers in a larger unemployed workforce. This industrial reserve army exerts downward pressure on wages and working conditions by creating labor surplus. Next part is immiseration of the proletariat. Immiseration of the proletariat is a condition of the working class worsens under capitalism over time. Firstly, according to Marx, immiseration, workers may see some improvement in their material conditions over time, but their position relative to the wealthy class continues to decline. As capitalists accumulate more wealth and power, the working class falls further behind in terms of influence and economic security. To maximize profit, employers often cut wages, reduce benefits, or outsource jobs. This means that workers are kept in unstable, low paid conditions even as overall wealth increases. Technological advancement often results in job displacement, de-skilling, and heightened employment instability, exacerbating the precariousness of working class livelihoods. Capitalists constantly seek to extract more work for the same or less pay, leading to the intensification of labor, increased stress, and often the de-skilling of jobs as workers are reduced to mere appendages of machines. This process fosters alienation, where workers feel disconnected from the products of their labor, the creative process, their fellow workers, and ultimately their own human essence, as work becomes a dehumanizing means of survival. Lastly, class conflict. Capitalist wealth concentration and growing worker impoverishment create intense exploitation, fostering class conflict. The next point is internal contradictions of capitalism lead to its collapse and the rise of proletarian rule. Lastly, state ownership replaces private property, ending exploitation, stabilizing capital, and making workers collective owners of the means of production. That is all from me. Thank you.
My name is Wong Woon See. My metric number is 298333. Now I will continue by presenting the comparison between the law of motion of capitalism by Marx and the theory of economic development by Adam Smith. As you can see, the graph on the left represents Karl Marx's law of motion of capitalism, while the graph on the right illustrates Adam Smith's theory of economic development. From these two graphs, we can identify some similarities between their models. Firstly, both theories begin with production-related concepts. Karl Marx starts with the labor theory of value and the theory of exploitation, while Adam Smith focuses on the division of labor, which leads to increased productivity. Secondly, both economists see capital accumulation as a key driver in the economic system. However, they interpret its effects very differently. Now, let us look more closely at how each economist views the effects of capital accumulation. In Cummings' model, capital accumulation leads to various economic problems. It results in a falling rate of profit, frequent business crises, and technological unemployment as machines replace workers. This creates a reserve army of unemployed workers, which weakens their bargaining power and leads to worsening poverty, also called immiseration. Meanwhile, wealth becomes more concentrated due to the centralization of capital, causing greater inequality. All of these factors eventually lead to class conflict between capitalists and workers. And Marx predicted that this would lead to collapse of capitalism and the rise of socialism. In construct, Adam Smith's model views capital accumulation as something positive. It enhances productivity through the division of labor, which increases national output and ultimately contributes to the wealth of the nation. At the same time, capital accumulation increases the wages found, allowing for higher wages for workers. Adam Smith believed that these factors work together can make productivity and output rise, and everyone benefits, including workers, businesses, and the overall economy. In conclusion, both Marx and Adam Smith recognize the importance of production and capital accumulation as central elements in economic development. However, Marx believed that capital accumulation would have negative effects, leading to a falling rate of profit, business crisis, and technological unemployment, which would lead to an increase in unemployment and poverty. Then the collapse of capitalism, which would be replaced by socialism. On the other hand, Adam Smith believed that capital accumulation would have positive effects, as the division of labor would spur capital accumulation to increase productivity growth, then constitute the wealth of the nation. This is a partial question from A231 related to this topic. And here is another past year question from A222. This is our main reference, so that's all from our group presentation. Thank you.